Do you need a landscaping job tackled? Keen Landscaping is a family-owned and operated full-service landscaping company based in Dallas, Texas. Anything from property restoration and tree pruning or removal to landscape design, construction, and installation, Keen covers it all. They're also the official landscape company of the Dallas Stars. Learn more at keenlandscaping.com. Again, that's Keane, landscaping.com. Welcome to Parker's MMA Show. If you want to learn about all things going down in the fight world, you've come to the right place. Each episode, your host Parker Keene will take a deeper dive into the always entertaining world of sanctioned fist fighting. Now here's your host, Parker Keene.
All right, we're back. Parker's MMA Show, episode 43 now, Billy. We are rocking and rolling. We got a lot to cover. We're going to try to keep it to an hour again, so let's dive right in. Like always, everyone like, subscribe, share, do all that good stuff. All right, Billy, we got a lot to cover, so let's do it. So let's start with, we're going to start with the previous two cards, and then we're going to preview Whittaker versus Till, which is going down this weekend. We're going to kind of start from the lowest weight classes and work our way up. So, Billy, let's start with the flyweights. We've got the new flyweight king established, Deiveson Figueiredo, and his red streaky hair is for real. What did you think of his performance against Joey B?
First of all, shout out producer Joe. The God of War is producer Joe's favorite fighter, so got to give a shout out there. But I think that's the most lopsided title fight I've ever seen in my life. I've never seen someone so dominant over, a full round of fighting that way. I mean, we've obviously seen quick knockouts like McGregor-Aldo. We've seen kind of the dominance of like an Adesanya against Rob Whittaker. But I think this was non-competitive and almost hard to watch at points, especially for the two of us who are big Joe Benavidez fans, as anyone who follows the sport has been for a long time.
Yeah. Figueiredo. How do you say his last name? So I'm not struggling.
Figueiredo.
I'm just gonna call him God of War. Okay, not to be confused with the Prince of War, Greg Hardy, but the God of War looked fucking fantastic. I mean, he knocked Joey B down twice officially, really 3 times, and then when the fight hit the ground, he was just all over him. The dude is super aggressive on the feet, on the floor. He's going to be a real problem for anyone on the flyweight roster right now. So, yeah, that was a dominant fight. I mean, God of War just buzzsawed Joey V. So, for Joey B, is he, in your opinion, where does he rank on most talented, best fighters to never win UFC gold?
I don't think he's that high, honestly. I really like Joe Benavidez. I think he's a really good fighter. To me, he's like Hall of Very Good, right? And I think he's benefited from being just such a nice guy, such a good with the media and so involved with the sport. For me, my best fighter to never win the UFC title is Dan Henderson. I think he, what he did in Pride, what he did outside the UFC is just really amazing. I think Joe B just was a guy who was really good in a pretty shallow division and, got a lot of chances and came up short every single time he got a chance at the title. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I'll always have guys like Dan Henderson, Uriah Faber, even like a Nick Diaz, above him for sure. I mean, those guys, the level of competition they fought over their career is just night and day from what Joey B fought. I mean, Joey B, had a good run at flyweight. He moved up and fought Dominic Cruz a couple times, lost twice. Then he fought Mighty Mouse twice and lost. And now he's got the 2 losses to Deiveson Figueiredo, and sprinkled in there was a loss to Sergio Pettis. So I agree. I think he'll go down as one of the better, probably smaller weight fighters of all time, but I don't think he breaks the top 5 or maybe even the top 10 of best fighters of all time in the UFC to not win a title. So all right. So what's next for Joey Benavidez? do you think he's going to decide to hang it up, or does he keep going, or what's next for him?
I hope he hangs it up, man, because I just don't see what's left for him here. You know, you're not going to put that guy in another title shot. And I just think he looked very done to me. He looked like a guy where he just doesn't have it anymore. I mean, the chin looked shot. I know Figueiredo hits like a truck at that weight class, but I just don't see it. I don't see what's left for him. I don't see what's left in the tank for him, to be quite honest. And, like, you don't want to end up as a guy like a BJ Penn who you end up tarnishing your legacy because you just get knocked out over and over and over again. Like, nobody wants to see that.
Right. Yeah, no, I totally agree. He had never, I think he'd only been finished maybe once in his career by Mighty Mouse, and then he's got, 2 back-to-back finishes to the same guy, 1 knockout, 1 submission, and, like we said, this fight wasn't even close. So if he wants to hang around, I don't see him ever getting a title shot again. So if he wants 1 or 2 more fights, okay. But outside of this is getting in the territory, like you said, of BJ Penn, Chuck Liddell, where, you're at the end of the road. It's time to hang it up, and it just goes south from here. This sport is very, very ruthless, and I'd hate to see that happen to a guy like Joey Benavidez because he's, like you said, he's such a nice guy. He's been a company guy. It would be sad to see his career end like that. So, I'm hoping he hangs it up as well. Do you see Figueiredo being able to, reign as the flyweight champ for a long time, assuming, that King Henry doesn't come back and Cody Garbrandt doesn't go down the path to, putting together 4, 5, 6 title defenses looks pretty clear for him at the moment.
Even if Cejudo was to come back or Cody Garbrandt is to drop down, I still think those are both really competitive matchups. I mean, Figueiredo is a really complete fighter. His Muay Thai is exceptional. He's got great power. He's a jiu-jitsu black belt. The only place where he struggles is probably the wrestling component, but he's so good off his back that it almost doesn't matter. I could see him getting taken down and getting sweeps. I think that guy is as complete a fighter as you'll see. I think the only thing he's missing is he doesn't speak great English, or else that's one of the most exciting fighters in the UFC.
Well, but another positive to that is he's Brazilian. So, Brazil is looking for their next star, their next champion, with Anderson Silva basically at the end of his career, Jose Aldo towards the end of his career. I really think, and this is my next question, does he have enough potential to save that division? And I'm going to say yes, especially with the Brazilian ties when the world gets back to normal and the UFC can bring him to Brazil to headline cards. I think he could be a really big star.
Yeah, I think the question there is we've never seen a big UFC star under 145 pounds. Never. So I don't know if he's the guy to break that mold. I definitely think he could be a guy who hangs around a long time and kind of becomes almost like a Mighty Mouse of Brazil, where the hardcores know how talented he is, and even though he doesn't draw numbers from casual fans, he's well known within the MMA sphere.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, so for the God of War, he's now 19-1, undefeated in the UFC. Seems very, very hungry to, just keep fighting immediately. I think he's already talking about getting back in there in November. Like we said, this is a guy that I think has kind of flown under the radar of a lot of people, but, the dude's vicious. He comes to finish fights. So what do you think's next for him?
I think the fight to make is if Cody Garbrandt's going to drop down 125 pounds, I think that is an absolute banger. I think Cody Garbrandt has a lot of star power behind him, that a win over him for Figueiredo could really boost his stock. And then I think he booked a Brandon Moreno against Askarov, who won on this weekend's card, in a kind of a number one contender fight, and just kind of set that up and keep this going. But I think flyweight is honestly really fun right now. I thought that Askarov against Alexander Pantoja fight was really fun. I think if you put Cody Garbrandt in the mix, that's really fun. But I really want to see Cody Garbrandt against Deiveson Figueiredo. I think that's a banger of a fight.
Absolutely. And Garbrandt, to me, at the moment, is kind of out of the title picture, for at least another fight. So I think he's really got nothing to lose by going down to 125 right now. It's the title's there. He could fight in September, October, November. And and for Garbrandt too, if he could get that belt, I think the UFC and everyone wins because he's got huge star potential, but he's just in there with sharks right now at 135. So I think that would be very interesting and very beneficial for everyone to make that fight right now. I just don't see any of these other guys as a huge, standout number one contender right now at 125. So, that'll be interesting to see how that goes. All right, let's move on to the big card, the big Fight Island card. Petr Yan taking on Jose Aldo. For me, this was one of the best fights of the night. I think you and I kind of predicted it would be. But what were your initial thoughts on that fight?
I think my goal by the end of this podcast, Parker, is to get you to say Jose Aldo instead of Jose Aldo. But
I'm in the landscaping business, Billy. Come on. Got a lot of Jose's in my life.
I know, but we're talking Portuguese, not Hispanic here. But okay,
I got you.
That fight was the most exciting fight of UFC 251, the big pay-per-view on Fight Island. I thought that was a phenomenal fight. I was like on the edge of my seat that entire time. Aldo looked phenomenal. We talked about it, but he came back with the leg kicks with a vengeance. I thought he was really blowing up Jan's lead leg, but then Yan just drowns people with that pressure, right? He forces you up against the cage. He comes straight forward. His boxing just pushes you and pushes you and pushes you. And eventually it just broke Aldo. He just couldn't handle it by those later rounds. So I loved watching that fight. I thought, as far as high-level MMA goes, that's about as exciting as it gets for me. What did you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think that was... Did that end up winning fight of the night on that card?
Yes.
Or no? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think it was a huge showcase for Petr Yan because, that's another guy that a lot of people were kind of sleeping on, thinking that, he hadn't really fought any tough level competition. And, Jose Aldo right now, to me, I think at any given night he can beat anyone in the top 5 in that division right now, even an aging Jose Aldo. He looked incredible, and I think he solidified himself that he's there to stay at 135 at least for the next couple of years, and he's going to put on a lot of competitive fights with these younger guys. But Yan, he's another guy. He doesn't speak English, but he's very funny. He's good on the mic. He's just going to be really tough to beat. I don't know, who does he remind you of? That pressure is just like it's like a Nick Diaz, Tony Ferguson pressure where he's just like so calm. He never gets too excited. He just marches you down and drowns you over time. And I just think I agree. I think he's going to be very, very hard to beat in these 5-round fights. So great performance by him. For Jose Aldo, where do you want to see him go from here?
I want to see the WEC super fight. I want to see him fight Dom Cruz. Dom was the longtime reigning champ of the WEC at 135. Jose Aldo was the 145 champ. Jose seems committed to dropping down to this division and looked phenomenal. Both physically and in the cage looked phenomenal. So I'm down to see that fight, like kind of a legacy, two guys who should be Hall of Famers one day. I want to see them go at it.
That's a super, super interesting stylistic matchup, too. I think that'll be a really fun fight, and you could headline a card with that. But, I'm down with that. I like that fight. The second one I had was Cody Garbrandt. I think that I don't know why in my head I think that's just an awesome fight, Cody Garbrandt versus Jose Aldo. So I think that's probably the two most realistic fights. You see Dom is definitely in the gym, so it's not like he's hanging it up. And I think Jose Aldo's he wants to get back in there. I think right now he feels like he's 100% in talks of being the best 135 fighter on the planet. Even after all these years. So, both of those are great matchups. For Yan, I think you and I both agree the next fight's Aljamain Sterling.
It's laughable at this point to me that Dana White hasn't just come out and said it. Like, I don't think there's a clearer number one contender in any division in the UFC. Like, Aljo has, won 7 of his last 8. His only loss is to Marlon Moraes. He's beaten 2 of the guys who are currently in the top 5 at 135. He's coming off a dominant victory over Sandhagen. There's legitimate heat between him and Yan. Yan seems to want the Aljamain Sterling fight. I don't see why this fight is not already like, in negotiation, like this is the only matchup we want. Like, I just don't get it.
What do you think Dana is what's Dana holding out for? Cody Garbrandt fight?
I just don't think Dana likes Aljo, if we're being totally honest. Like, Aljo gets stuffed on the prelims all the time. He's had to just grind and grind and grind to get to the title shot. I don't know if it's because Aljo's vocal about fighter pay or he just, isn't a quote unquote fun fighting style, even though I think that's nonsense. Like, I honestly don't understand. Like, I think that is a perfect fight stylistically. I think it does, just as good numbers as anything at 135. I honestly don't get it, but, here we are just sitting around waiting for Dana to just say, hey, this is the next fight.
Yeah. All right. So anything else you want to add from that fight? That was, like we said, that was a big statement for Yan to A, get the belt, and then B, finish, a legend like Jose Aldo. So, all right, let's move on to the next fight. I thought this was a great fight, too. The Alexander Volkanovski versus Max Holloway fight. Obviously, the first fight was 100% Volkanovski. He pretty much dominated Max. Max couldn't get going at all. And then the first 2 rounds of this fight, Max absolutely flips the script and looked, like the Max Holloway of old. And then, the pace kind of slowed a little bit, and I thought Volk won the last 2 rounds, handedly. So really the round that was up for question was round number 3. How did you score the fight?
I had it exactly the same way you just described. I had Max winning the first 2 rounds clearly. I had Volkanovski winning the last 2 rounds clearly. And I have, round 3 was as close a round as you can score. I had it for Max. I've watched the fight twice now. I had it for Max both times. I'm not Luke Thomas, who watched it 49 times apparently. But I just think like this fight is such a perfect example of why scoring in MMA is the problem. It's not judging. Like, that round is so hard to call. Like, if you want to give that a draw, like a 10-10, or give it 10-9 Max or 10-9 Volk, I could see either way. But the fact of the matter is like, MMA fights don't work with round-by-round scoring. They don't work with a 10-point must system. Like, the first 2 rounds were a lot less close than the last 2 rounds, even though there were clear winners. Like, if we're scoring the fight as a whole, I think Max wins, clearly. But I have no problem with Volkanovski winning based off the scoring criteria that we currently have in MMA. And to me, the problem is with how we score fights in general rather than how we scored this particular fight. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know. I mean, I think you texted me this. Someone texted me. It was like, hey, there should definitely be more draws in MMA. I mean, this is one that it's very, very close. I gave the edge to Max. I thought he did more damage early, and I gave him round 3. He had the 2 knockdowns that at the end of round 1 and round 2 that I thought they were the most vicious shots, of the entire fight. So I don't know. It's so hard to judge these fights, and I agree. I think eventually they're going to have to change something because we see it on almost every card, and it's not. This one is not a robbery, and I didn't see a lot of people on social media calling it a robbery. It's just a very, very close fight that I think went the wrong way. I see this as pretty similar to how I saw the Joanna Weili Zhang fight. I thought Joanna edged that fight out. It was very back and forth the whole time, but I don't know, man. It's kind of shitty for Max because he's at this stage in his career. He's going to be kind of thrown back to the wolves, in the top 5, and I don't think he's going to be able to work his way back to that title fight. I think he's going to have to get 2 good wins in that top 5. So it's a hard spot to throw Max in, and for the UFC too. I mean, Max is a big star, and to have him not be able to get his title back and force a trilogy fight, on a very close fight, like that's tough. It's just tough for everyone. So, what do you think the UFC is going to do next? Do you think? I don't know if this has ever been done. Has a trilogy fight ever been booked off of 2 back-to-back losses?
I don't know about back-to-back, but they've definitely booked trilogy fights where one guy won the first 2. I really do think Dana's going to book this trilogy. I really think it's going to happen.
Immediately?
Immediately. I really think so. I think Dana feels like Max won that fight. I think he feels like the judging is to blame, even though I don't understand how you could possibly say that with how close round 3 was. But I really think he thinks that this was a robbery, and he's created that narrative in his head, and he's going to rebook it. And I also think he loves Max Holloway, which how could you not? So I think they booked the trilogy, to be honest.
I do too, and it's just such a great matchup. And the problem with rematches is just so hard. We saw this in the Rose versus Jessica fight. Rematches are just so hard in MMA, especially after you have a whole 5-round fight with a guy. What that guy brings to the table, and to try to do that again and not mix something else up, which I think that's kind of what Volkanovski was. I think that was his game plan. I think Volkanovski thought he was going to come in and pretty much do the same thing he did in the first fight, and Max just wasn't having it. So I don't know. I was looking at the top 5, and there's really fun fights for Max. I don't know. I want to see him get the belt back. So whatever is going to be the faster path for Max to get that belt back, because I do think he's still the best fighter in the world. And he's a top 5 fighter to me, in my eyes, at both divisions, at 155 and 145. So I don't think they're going to book it immediately. I think he's got to have at least 1 or 2 fights to just build some steam back, get his confidence back, and get something different. I think it's hard, to fight 10 rounds back-to-back with the same guy. It takes a lot out of you. Look at Robert Whittaker, Yoel Romero. You have 2 tough fights back-to-back like that. It drains a lot from you. So I think the UFC, Max Holloway, everyone's going to benefit from a fresh rematch. And I think it'll also, for Volkanovski, it's going to build his reputation, to get another win against another killer. If he can knock off Korean Zombie or Brian Ortega, and then build up to that trilogy with Max. Because I do think, a year from now, that's going to be a huge fight, and I think we're going to get it. I think they need to wait, let it settle a little bit, and then let it build again organically. So
give my guy Volkanovski a little bit of credit here too, Parker, because he stood in there and he fought a kickboxing fight with Max Holloway, and he beat him the first time, and I think clearly, and he stood toe-to-toe with him in the rematch, and it was at the very least a very, very close fight, and probably a fight that we both agree was about a draw. And if Max Holloway is a top 5 fighter in 2 divisions in the UFC right now, you have to put Volkanovski right there with him, because he looked every bit as skillful as Max, every bit as powerful as Max, and he stood in there with him and took on Max's best skill. So I don't think Volkanovski's getting the respect he deserves from the MMA community right now. And I just like to say that guy is one of the best fighters in the world, and it's unquestionable at this point, because that first fight was not a fluke.
Well, just look at his track record. I mean, he does fly under the radar because I think Max is just a huge fan and media favorite. But, I mean, he's knocked off Jose Aldo, then he knocked off Max twice. I mean, that's your 2 best featherweights of all time right there.
And
back to
stop
back.
Chad Mendez's career.
Yeah.
He retired Chad Mendez. I mean, you can't deny how good this guy is. And the only guy who's really been able to give him any problems at all is Max Holloway. And it's in one fight where Volk won dominantly and one fight that was very close.
Yeah, so for Max, he obviously looked a lot better, much improved in this fight. What, in your mind, did he do better in this fight?
He led the fight. I mean, we talked about it in our preview of this, but Max was first to all the exchanges. He led the fight. He led the dance, and he got going early so that Volk didn't have time to make his reads. Where when Max kind of sat back and was tentative in the first fight, it allowed Volkanovski the time he needed to kind of read what Max was doing. And you saw it kind of coming to fruition in the later rounds. But in those first 2 rounds, I mean, Max was picking him apart for, large swaths of those rounds. I mean, that's not easy to do, but Max was able to just kind of lean on his kickboxing and do some really impressive stuff in those first 2 rounds.
Yeah, I think another big thing is he just flat out did not accept taking damage to the legs. He was just not, he was checking kicks, he was dodging them. He was not, I think he learned a lot from that first fight, because that's what, in my mind, Volkanovski did the best in the first fight, was completely took out that lead leg and made Max a one-dimensional fighter where, his strength is to constantly switch stances, fight from both stances, and, he puts his combos together incredible. And I think Volkanovski limited that. You saw a lot more of that in the early 3 rounds from Max. And then the one concerning thing for me that it's just not like Max, and I don't know, this could be Volkanovski as well, but round 4 and 5, you just didn't see him put the gas on. I mean, I was shouting from the couch, he's got to pick up the pace here or he's going to lose a decision, and that's what actually ended up happening. So, I don't know what it is with Max, if he felt like he was ahead and didn't need to push the pace or what it was, but I just didn't see that next gear, after the 3rd round. It was like he was kind of on cruise control, and I don't know if he was trying to stay safe or what it was, but I think if he pushed just a little more in either of those rounds, he walks out of there with a decision.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you.
Yeah. So for Max, what's next for Max? In my mind, I mean, as I look up and down the rankings, he's kind of in a shit position because there's no gigantic fight to make, right away. You're talking kind of the Calvin Katars of the world, maybe Yair Zabit. He's already fought Ortega, and then you got Korean Zombie, but Who in that top 5 do you want to see Max fight next? And do you think there's any outside chance that he moves back up to 155?
I would love the Calvin Kattar fight. I think that is really stylistically a great fight. I think Max Holloway can easily carry either, a main card fight on a pay-per-view or a fight night all by himself against, some bum they picked out of the parking lot. So I think a Calvin Kattar fight is kind of perfect for where he's at in his career right now. But I would not put aside him moving up to 155 and taking, a fight there, whether it's a Poirier rematch. I even think a McGregor rematch is really a dark horse, but it's kind of on the table.
That's where I was going there. That's kind of where I was going there. That started popping up on my radar today. I'm like, okay, I could definitely see Max Holloway taking on Conor McGregor at 155 because Conor's kind of backed himself into a corner here where there's not a lot of options right now. So, yeah, I could definitely see that on the table. I love the Poirier fight. If we're saying he needs 2 fights, I agree with you. I think the Calvin Kattar fight is the best fight to make right now in 145 if he's got to fight one of those. And if they book that fight, that could be one of your fight of the years, candidates right away, especially if that's a 5-round fight. That's going to be chaos. Those 2 guys are going to freaking get after it.
I think Max could beat Calvin Kattar and go right back to a title shot. I think he could go right back to a title shot, especially if Volkanovski loses the belt in his next defense that's not against Holloway. I think Max beats Kattar. He's right back for a title shot. I think he goes and fights Poirier or Conor McGregor. It does not set him up for a 145 title shot, even if it's technically a bigger fight and draws more eyeballs.
Yeah, that's what I meant by 2 fights is I think he could take a fight at 145 and then go take a fight at 155 and let 145 shake out and then come back down, and walk right back into a title fight. So, yeah, and for Max Holloway, there's no better fight. There's no one takes a loss better than Max Holloway in this sport. He's gracious in defeat, victory. Max Holloway is the fucking man. And again, still 28 years old, Max Holloway, after all of this. So, yeah, that great fight though. I enjoyed that. All right, so for Volkanovski, he's like we said, he's slowly building up a pretty outstanding resume. Who do you want to see him match up with next?
I want to see my guy, the Korean Zombie, get his shot. I mean, Parker, when we did the deep dive, I told you that I currently think Korean Zombie is the best featherweight on the planet. I think that guy is on a different level right now. I think he's just training out of control. I just think he is that good, and I want to see Korean Zombie against Alexander Volkanovski in Australia, New Zealand, Asia, wherever it is, on that side of the world. I just think that's a massive fight in that area of the world, and it's two guys who are at the top of the sport in terms of skill set. I think they're good everywhere. They're exciting fighting styles. That's what I want to see. What do you think?
I don't know. I'm looking. Okay, let's do this. So play UFC matchmaker here. How do you rank, or how do you match up the top 5 right now at flyweight or at featherweight? You've got Volkanovski as a champ, Max Holloway is number 2, Korean Zombie's number 3, you've got Zabit at 4, you've got Calvin Kattar at 5, and then at 6 you've got Yair.
So here's what I would
I
book.
think we're forgetting about Brian Ortega too. Brian Ortega is obviously still in that ball game.
Here's what I would book right now if I'm a UFC matchmaker, right? Max Holloway against Calvin Kattar.
Love it.
Alexander Volkanovski against the Korean Zombie. Zabit against Yair. And the winner of oh my God, why am I blanking on this? I would book
Pedro Munoz.
Ortega against, well, that's at 135. I would book Ortega against like a Jeremy Stevens. Because I think Ortega needs a win. Ortega hasn't fought since that Max Holloway fight. I don't think he's I think that's a really big mistake if the UFC is going to book him against a guy like Korean Zombie who's just on a tear.
And then he goes in and gets starched. I also think we got to have Yair versus Zabit. That is a fucking awesome matchup. Incredible matchup. So Yair versus Zabit, Volkanovski, Korean Zombie, and then outside of that, Josh Emmett and what's his name would be a fun fight, but Josh Emmett's out for a year. Josh Emmett and Ortega would be a fun fight.
I don't want to keep Ortega on the shelf. That's my thing.
Yeah, you got to get him rolling. All right, well, yeah, I agree with you. I think Korean Zombie, I'm totally down for him sliding into that championship fight. You know, I think Volkanovski will want to get one more in probably before the end of the year. So, but overall, great fight. This is one of those fights neither guy in my mind really loses anything. You know, so all right, let's move on to the main event. We had Jorge Masvidal stepping in on 6 days' notice against Kamaru Usman. Well, I don't know. I think I was a little high on the storybook ending and not really living in reality. But I think if we would have thought with our brains a little more than thinking with our hearts, this is probably how we would have thought it would have went. I mean, basically, Masvidal goes in there and just has a game plan to give it, 30 to 45 seconds per round to try to knock him out. And if that didn't work, he was going to, submit to basically just getting, rode out, controlled for 5 rounds. And that's pretty much what happened.
I said it in our predictions. I was like, my head says 50-45 decision Usman. My heart says Masvidal knockout, and I'm going with the Masvidal knockout. But, no. And look, people are going to say that, that it's boring, that it's like, not fun. That does not take away from how athletically impressive Kamaru Usman is. I think Kamaru Usman is an incredibly dominant, effective fighter. I think he's an incredible world-class athlete. I think his strategy for this fight was unmatched. It does not mean that I want to watch that for 25 minutes on my TV. And this is someone who loves wrestling, who loves grappling, who regularly watches collegiate wrestling and grappling competitions. But, Kamaru Usman is just not an exciting fighter. It doesn't make it less impressive. It's not easy to do what he did to Jorge Masvidal, but it's not exciting to watch in an MMA fight. I'm sorry.
So was the result of this fight kind of the worst case scenario for the UFC? Obviously, they were crunched for time and didn't have a lot of options on the table. But what are your thoughts on, the after effect of this fight for the UFC?
I do think this was worst case scenario. It was like, it's a fight that kind of leaves a bad taste in your mouth. You texted me afterwards saying like you don't even want to think about how bad that main event was. You're one of your biggest stars, certainly your biggest active star, goes down in kind of dominant fashion. Usman does not do himself any favors on the mic afterwards or in the interviews afterwards in terms of building his own stardom off of a guy who, by beating Jorge Masvidal, you should be building your star, and Usman did nothing of the sort. I just think
he basically knocked off the biggest star in the sport, and no one cares. Pretty much, it's just like on to Gilbert Burns, I guess.
I think that was about as bad, from in the cage and after as it could have gone for the UFC's business, unfortunately. Which, it's no knock to Kamaru Usman, who extremely impressive performance, but at the end of the day, it's not helping the UFC's bottom line what happened in that cage.
Well, I think they had to know that going into that fight that was, they were gambling on Masvidal to go in there and knock him out. I think is the bottom line. And if he did that, I mean, we're talking about a totally different story. Masvidal's the biggest star in the UFC. He's setting himself up for gigantic pay-per-views for the rest of, the next year or so. So, yeah, I don't know. It was just kind of a buzzkill, honestly. It was a great card from, start to finish, and then that was just, we got blue balls, Billy, in the main event there. I was so frustrated the entire time. Anyway, so moving on, obviously Jorge didn't have a real dedicated training camp. He was originally planning to fight Usman. Negotiations broke down. The UFC went ahead with Burns, and then he steps back in on 6 days' notice. So taking all that into consideration, do you think we see an immediate rematch, or do you think we see a rematch down the road with these two again, and do you see it playing out any differently?
I think we do get a rematch of these two. I don't think it's immediate. I think they'll take at least one fight, but I think if Usman defends his title one more time and Masvidal gets a win in his next fight, you could see a rematch after that.
Yeah.
I think the big difference here, I don't like the narrative that Jorge had no camp, because I don't think that's true at all. I think Jorge took a break from camp, probably for a couple weeks, maybe up to 3 weeks there. And so I think his cardio probably wasn't at 100%. It was probably at about 70%. So I think you really saw it in kind of the 4th and 5th round where the explosiveness out of Jorge was completely gone. And I don't necessarily know if that changes in the rematch, but I would like to see it where Jorge has a full, complete camp. And I think really he proved out his stardom. I mean, they're talking about 1.3 million pay-per-view buys estimated. So I think the UFC will have no problem paying Jorge Masvidal in the future.
Well, and for Jorge, this is a win-win for him. He steps in, probably gets the biggest payday of his career, and really loses no steam. I think they could turn around and book, Conor McGregor. They could book Nate Diaz for him, and it still does gigantic numbers. So that leads me to my next question. What do you think's next for Jorge?
I haven't seen a lot of this, but I love the Leon Edwards fight as essentially a number one contender fight. There's a natural storyline there. Leon Edwards is obviously kind of the big loser of the pandemic with losing the Tyron Woodley fight. So I kind of think that's a perfect fight for those two guys to, basically be a number one contender fight with either Jorge getting a rematch or another shot at the title, or Leon finally getting his title shot. I think that's perfect.
Yeah, I think for Jorge, it's time for him to kind of decide what he wants to do. Does he want to be a UFC champion, or does he want to make a shitload of money? And I think that's going to kind of dictate the course he takes. Because if he wants to be a UFC champion, he's got to go through Colby Covington or Leon Edwards. If he wants to just go out and put on gigantic pay-per-views, you're going to see him fight Conor McGregor. You're going to see him fight Nate Diaz. And that's kind of where I think he's at right now. And I think he could go either way. I think in the long run, if he could get that title somehow, that stuff's going to get crazy.
The other one that people aren't really talking about that I would love to see is I want to see the Wonder Boy rematch.
Yeah, but I think A, that's a hard fight, and B, that's not a big money fight for him. So that's kind of
it's bigger than Leon
kind
Edwards.
Of up there with yeah, it would be bigger than Leon Edwards and probably a more winnable fight. But
our boy Sean Sheehan would be happy.
Yes, he would. I want to see. I think it's time for the Nate Diaz rematch. If Conor's not going to fight, I think they could book Nate and Jorge for September, October, and that could be a gigantic fight. You get Nate back into fighting. You let welterweight kind of play out a little bit, and then he jumps back into the title picture and maybe fights a guy like Colby or Leon for the number one contender and then gets his rematch against Usman. But
Conor's not fighting.
Usman looked incredible.
Parker, Conor's not fighting. He's smoking doobies on the beach, dude. This guy's not fighting anytime soon.
Yeah, I don't know. He's really letting me down here. It's not much of a season he's having. So, all right. But again, I mean, we can't take away any credit from Usman here. Usman looked incredible. I compare him most to GSP. He obviously doesn't have the stardom that GSP has, but he has that same style where it's a dominant style, it's a draining style, and it's a winning style. I mean, it's gonna get the job done at the end of the day, So yeah, great performance for him. What do you want for him next? I think you and I kind of both agree on this.
I mean, it's going to be Gilbert Burns, right? I mean, Usman's brand is kind of this next man up mentality. And he's just going to stack title defenses. If I was Usman and I really wanted to build up my star a bit more, I would be banging the drum on UFC Africa. UFC needs to go to Africa, needs to host an event there. I'd be banging the drum on trying to go to Lagos, Nigeria, with a card of Francis and Usman and Adesanya and, just blow the whole thing out because I think that would be groundbreaking for the sport. I think he would come off as a huge star, and I don't think it would matter if he hugged the guy against the cage for 25 minutes. I think that crowd would go absolutely ballistic to watch him defend his title. So that's kind of how I see Usman, really boosting himself up, is really campaigning for the UFC to go to Africa.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on. Thug Rose back in action against Jessica Andrade. Overall, I thought she looked very good. It was a hard fight. Like I said before, rematches are very, very hard in the UFC, especially at the highest levels. But how did you think Thug Rose looked in her return?
I thought she kind of started fast, which I didn't expect. By the end of that first round, she was piecing up Andrade pretty well. It wasn't nearly as dominant as that first fight with before the slam KO, obviously, but I think she really slowed down towards the end. And I don't know if that was the broken nose or cardio in general, but that was my takeaway, was started really fast, picked up the timing really fast, and then kind of slowed down towards the end. What did you think?
Yeah, I think a lot of the pace was Jessica. I mean, Jessica just pushed the pace and was just fighting a reckless, kind of chaotic fight. For Rose, I thought she looked good. I thought that kind of fight was probably one of the best fights she could come back to just see exactly where her head's at, with the sport. Rose is a girl that's, half the battle with her is mental. So to come back and have a hard fight and show that, A, you can survive a fight like that, B, you still got the skills to get it done and win at the very highest level. I think that was big for her. To me, she never really got in that flow that she's, kind of famous for with her, the first round against Jessica and then her fights with Joanna. She just never really seemed to get it going. She looked good in spurts, and then I thought she was just kind of hittable towards the end, the end of round 2 and then going into round 3. She started to take a lot of damage, so that was concerning. But, I mean, overall, the bottom line, she got back. She got a win, and I think she sets herself up for a gigantic fight in her next fight. So, how did you score the fight?
I think the judges got it right. I had a 29-28 Rose. I think the first and third were pretty clear. The second was close for me, but I had Rose winning. But, again, kind of like the Zabit-Calvin Kattar fight, I think if that goes 5 rounds, I think Rose is in real trouble. I think she could have lost that if that went 5 rounds.
Yeah, I think normally she wouldn't have been. I think she would have paced herself better and been threatening late, but that broken nose was nasty. And you see her, the next week she's beat up. I think she maybe broke her orbital, broke her nose. So, yeah, that would have been a problem because that was getting really bad. The eye could have closed. And I think if that goes past 3 rounds, that fight maybe gets stopped. I don't know if Andrade knocks her out or finishes her, but I think maybe like a doctor stoppage or something like that. So, yeah, I mean, but for Rose, like I said, she got back in the win column, and she's going to set herself up for a giant fight. So what do you think? Where do you think Jessica Andrade goes from here?
I actually thought this was a really good showing out of Andrade. I think, in the later round, she showed an ability to close the distance. She obviously has incredible power. I want to see her fight Tatiana Suarez. I think Tatiana Suarez was, for a long time, considered the boogie woman of strawweight. She hasn't fought in a while. I kind of see that as almost like a number 1 contender fight. And I want to see Andrade against Suarez with kind of Suarez taking that step up to fighting the elites at strawweight.
Right. No, I agree. I'm down with that. For Rose, I think there's only 2 women for Rose. It's going to be the trilogy with Joanna, or there's going to be a big fight with Weili Zhang. What do you think is going to be next for Rose? Because for the UFC, I don't think they can go wrong with either of these fights. Both of these fights are huge.
I think they're going to book the title. I think it's going to be Weili Zhang against Rose Namajunas, especially because I don't know that Joanna is coming back this year. She took a lot of damage in that Zhang fight. I think they will eventually book a rematch between the two of them, but I think there could be a Rose Namajunas, Weili Zhang fight in between.
Yeah, I agree, and I don't know. I just see those 3 right now for the next couple of years. If Rose will stay in the sport and keep her head about her, there's going to be a lot of fun fights with those 3. I could see those 3 women fighting each other multiple times over the next couple of years because it's so competitive, and they all bring different stuff to the table. So it's the matchups there at the top are very, very interesting. But good win for Thug Rose. She's back. Really excited to see her back. But all right, let's move on to Calvin Kattar versus Dan Ige. What were your thoughts on that fight?
I thought this was a really dominant win for Calvin Kattar. I'm really high on Calvin Kattar. There were a few glimpses from Dan Ige in the second round, but in general, I just think Kattar dominated him, and I think Kattar was able to just kind of pick his spots and coast to a decision win. I also think Calvin Kattar had a broken nose that was not fully healed from the Jeremy Stevens fight, and you kind of saw it where he was clearly having trouble breathing. But I think if he's fully healthy, he KOs Ige and he comes right for him. But I think it showed how good Kattar is as a striker because he was able to kind of sit back and just pick his spots and really coast to a decision victory where, except for a couple moments in the second, I never felt like he was in danger.
Yeah, I totally agree. I can't add anything to that. So, for Ige, where do you think he goes from here?
I want to see him rematch Edson Barbosa. I think Barbosa was robbed in that fight. I think it was a fun fight regardless, but I will really want to see that rematch. I really want to see Barbosa get that back. So that's where I want to see Ige go next.
Yeah, I'm down with that. That was a very, very close fight. I think those guys too are like 7-8 or something, so they match up, pretty close to each other. So I'm down with that. For Calvin Kattar, we kind of already talked about it, but I think you and I are both very high on the Max Holloway fight. I just think stylistically that's a very, very fun fight. I mean, that's an action fight. That's going to be awesome. So, and it's a huge step up in competition for Calvin Kattar. So we'll kind of see, is he really for real? Because the run he's been on, he's looked awesome. he's had a lot of good action in this coronavirus era. He's one of the guys, up there with like Gilbert Burns that have been very active, and they're making a name for themselves in the division. But stepping up, to fight one of the best featherweights of all time would be a big step up in competition. So for me, I want to see Max Holloway.
Yeah, and the other fight I'm interested in is I would definitely watch Calvin Kattar against Brian Ortega. I see that as like a classic striker versus grappler matchup. I think either of those guys could kind of put themselves right in the title picture if they won that fight. But obviously my number one choice is Max Holloway against Calvin Kattar.
Well, and then especially if they go ahead and book Korean Zombie for the next title shot, that leaves Brian Ortega to fight one of those guys. So, yeah, I'm down with either one of those matchups. All right, Billy, any other standouts you want to cover from Fight Island?
Yeah, I think we're getting into the Billy's Hardcore Minute portion of the podcast, right?
This is it, yeah.
You want to run through these questions?
Yeah. So, in your mind, whose stock has risen the most in Fight Island?
I got to go with Jack Hermanson. I think a lot of people kind of discounted him and thought that Kelvin would beat him pretty handily. And, he heel hooked Kelvin Gastelum in, a minute and a half. And I think he's one fight away from the title. I want to see Jack Hermanson take on the winner of Yoel Romero and Uriah Hall in kind of a number one contender fight at middleweight. That's really interesting to me.
Okay, who is the Dagestani fighter that trains with Gustafsson? That guy is a fucking animal. That guy is one of my favorite fighters from Fight Island. Do you know who I'm talking about? The guy that just absolutely mauled the Scottish guy. It was unbelievable.
Khamzat Chimaev, right?
Okay, yeah. So he's turning around on 10 days' notice to fight again. That guy's an animal. He's like, I think he's a 170 fighter, or is he 185?
170, yeah, he's a welterweight.
Okay. Yeah, keep an eye out for that guy this weekend. I caught his fight. God, he absolutely mauled that guy. He's like a more vicious Khabib. It was pretty impressive to watch. So I like that guy a lot. All right, what was your favorite fight out of the 3 Fight Island cards so far?
I got to go with Yuri Prohaska against Volkan Ozdemir. I've been banging the drum on Yuri Prohaska for a while now since watching him in Rizin. And, Volkan Ozdemir is a former title challenger in that division. Yuri does all kinds of weird stuff that whole fight and then knocks Ozdemir out cold. I was standing in my living room cheering, but Parker's texting me like, oh my God, your guy is unbelievable. Like, this is must-watch TV. I loved that fight. I want to see Yuri keep climbing the ranks at light heavyweight because he is so fun to watch, man. He's got that weird wushu or karate style and just, unbelievable power, puts guys to sleep.
Yeah, that was a really, really fun fight. If you haven't seen that fight, definitely go back and watch that. But yeah, he knocked Volkan Ozdemir clean out. I don't think Volkan's been knocked out like that in the UFC. But yeah, there was all kinds of craziness in that first round, and then that second round when he caught him, he put him to sleep. So yeah, that guy's someone to keep an eye out on for sure. Okay, who is a fighter that not a lot of people knew of before these Fight Island cards that we need to keep an eye out on?
I love Rafael Fiziev, I believe is how you pronounce it. The fight against Mark Diakese was kind of his coming out party. That Matrix move on the head kick where he bends back like Neo, dodging the head kick, is legendary. He's actually fought in Max Muay Thai and done the exact same move, so it's clearly something he practiced. And it's just one of these guys that it's controlled chaos, and you think he's just coming in there to brawl, but then you slowly realize from watching him, it's so technical. He's just making these reads so quickly that I'm really excited to watch him. I think he's got all the skills to actually make a run at the championship belt. So I'm really excited by Rafael Fiziev.
Yeah, I like this other guy, and I'm going to butcher his name so bad. Moyinar Lazazi.
This is the Moroccan guy.
Yes, this guy was super fun to watch. He was fighting I think he's a Nigerian guy that came out, Abdul Razik Al Hassan. You like that one, Billy?
Yeah.
That guy came out swinging for the fucking fences, and this guy just weathered the storm, and then he turned that fight, and he was very, very fun to watch. He's just an incredible striker. I think he's a head kickboxing coach maybe, or head striking coach at Team Nugera in Dubai. But, yeah, that dude he's a lot of fun to watch. So
well, Al Hassan, too.
I like that fight a lot.
Al Hassan, Parker, you'll remember, at the Whittaker-Till title fight in Dallas. He's the guy who walked out to Circle of Life and then knocked out the guy in like 19 seconds. He's a Fortis guy, so local flavor.
Yeah, that was a really fun fight. That was one of my favorite fights from the Fight Island series. But all right, so this weekend we've got a big fight going down. The middleweight. Really, to me, I think this is the middleweight number one contender fight. You've got Darren Till, who's recently moved up from welterweight to fight at middleweight, taking on former title holder Robert Whittaker. This is a great fight. This is one of those fights, Billy, that I can promise you is not going to suck. So, in your mind, is this the number one contender fight at middleweight right now?
No, it's not. I think Jared Cannonier is deservedly going to get the next middleweight title shot, no matter who wins this. I think Cannonier has proved that he's the top guy at middleweight, but it doesn't mean that this isn't an extremely fun fight.
I don't know. I think both of these guys, either guy with the win has the star power to jump Cannonier. I think Cannonier is also out with a bicep injury, tore his bicep a month or 2 months ago maybe. So he's going to be out for a stretch here. But, yeah, I think both of these guys are big stars. Obviously, Rob's been to the top. He was champion for a while. Darren Till hasn't got that belt, but he's still, he's a natural-born star, and I think eventually he'll break through. I don't know when. So I think this is definitely your number one contender fight for sure, 100%. All right, so for Rob, I mentioned it previously, but his last three fights, he came off of 10 hard rounds with Yoel Romero that he won both of those decisions, retained his belt, and then he got knocked out in front of his home in Australia, right? Was it Australia or New Zealand?
Australia.
Yeah, so he got knocked out in front of 55,000 people in his home country by Israel Adesanya, lost his belt, and has taken a little bit of time off. What do you expect from Robert Whittaker this weekend in his return?
So I really think the Izzy knockout, and Rob has talked about this, is partially a result of overtraining. I think Rob talked about how hard he would push himself and how he was kind of depressed and all kinds of things related to overtraining. So I feel like he'll be more measured and more kind of mentally sharp heading into this fight. Because I just think his game is so well balanced. He's such a balanced fighter that I really want to see him bounce back from that loss.
Yeah, I do too. I think if anyone in the Corona era that needs to fight in front of no crowd, it's Rob Whittaker. I think he just went from an extreme high of fighting in front of 55,000 people and getting knocked out viciously, in his home country. I think he just needs to get in there and fight his game. Darren Till, you pretty much know what you're going to get with Darren Till. He works everything around that big left hand. He's very similar to Conor McGregor. He'll disguise it and do a bunch of stuff, but at the end of the day, it's all about that left hand. Robert Whittaker's got a really weird style, and he's very hard to kind of pinpoint. And Darren Till has struggled against people that blitz him. Like, Woodley blitzed him, hurt him, got him to the ground, and just beat him up. Wonder Boy blitzed him a little bit, gave him trouble. He ended up winning that fight. And then Masvidal, that's how Masvidal knocked him out was basically blitzed him. Darren Till is moving straight backwards and got knocked out. So I don't know. This is a very, very interesting fight. I think this is one of the best striking matchups you can make right now in the UFC between these two guys. I love this matchup. So for Darren Till, obviously he's had one fight up at middleweight where he had a decision win against Kelvin Gastelum. Kelvin Gastelum now on a 3-fight losing streak at middleweight. But where do you think Darren Till's at right now, and where do you think he fits in at this division right now?
Look, I think Darren Till is definitely a top 10 fighter at middleweight. I don't know if he's like a title contender. And I think we have to consider the fact that like Kelvin has now lost 3 in a row and 4 of 6. Like it might not be, Kelvin might not be the fighter that we thought he was, maybe coming off of, kind of wins against, close decision win against Jacare, knocks out Bisping, close decision lost against Izzy, and we're all kind of thinking like, okay, Kelvin is clearly a top 5 guy, and I'm not so sure that that's accurate anymore. And so I'm wondering, after seeing Kelvin's latest performance, like I'm not convinced of Till being a super complete fighter or a guy who is undeniably a contender at 185. What do you think?
I mean, striking-wise, yes, I think he's world-class striking. But you saw in the Woodley fight, he got hurt early, got taken down. He couldn't do anything at all. And I think Rob, he's well-rounded. I mean, he's a complete MMA fighter, and he's got the experience. I mean, he's been a title contender. He's fought the best of the last 5 years at middleweight. He's been there. He's done that. He's still the younger guy. I think Rob's 28 years old and Darren Till's maybe 30. But, yeah, I don't know. I see this as a really tough fight for Till, especially he's basically being thrown through the wolves here. So we'll see what he's made of, after, fighting a guy like Rob Whittaker, because I can promise you that Rob Whittaker is going to come back. He's going to be hungry, and he's going to want to get that belt back. So you think there's any chance we see Rob try to get this fight to the ground? Like I said, we've previously seen Till struggle when it does get taken to the ground, and I think it's a pretty solid game plan for Rob to try to mix up the striking and then get him to the ground somehow.
I think Rob Whittaker does have a very underrated ground game. I think he's a very well-rounded fighter. He has good jiu-jitsu. He has good wrestling. He hasn't attempted a takedown since 2015 in the UFC, but he's fought against guys like Romero and Uriah Hall and Jacare and Derek Brunson, who are all kind of wrestlers and jiu-jitsu specialists, and it makes sense why he would keep the fight on the feet. I would go back to the Uriah Hall fight in 2015. I think this is going to go very similarly, and I think Rob has kind of developed as a fighter since then, but that's kind of the blueprint or the template that I see for how this fight is going to go.
Yeah, so for Darren Till, if he can get a win here against a former middleweight champion of the world, Robert Whittaker, what does this do for his stardom? Because in my opinion, I think Darren Till's a guy he's been very, very close on multiple occasions from, to becoming a gigantic superstar. He's got everything, he was compared a lot to Conor McGregor kind of on his rise. But if he can get a win here and maybe a knockout or devastating win against former champ Rob Whittaker, what do you think that does for his stardom?
Maybe I'm underrating Darren Till as a star, but I see him as more of a regional star, like kind of like a Michael Bisping, where I think he could be really big in the UK. I think he could have a lot of following in Liverpool, but I just don't see him making waves on the international stage the way a McGregor does or a Masvidal does, or really even like an Israel Adesanya. I just don't think he appeals on that level, but he's a really fun guy on social media. I think he's a fun character to have in the UFC. I don't see him as that kind of international star where I think when he was coming up, they were so desperate for the next big British star that they really pushed him. and he's just, I don't see the it factor with him.
I do. I see it in him. Like he's definitely got that it factor that if he can get past the elite competition at either weight class, he can become a big star, I think. I think he's one of these guys who's just like super genuine, super real. He's like, kind of like a Nate Diaz, Jorge Masvidal figure. And then he's got kind of that confidence like Sugar Sean or Conor McGregor. But I think he's got to have the skills too. Like I'm not seeing the skills that are going to take him to being a world champion right now at either weight class. I think if he goes back down to 170, he gets ragdolled by Usman. And I think at 185, I think him versus Israel Adesanya is a fun matchup, but I think Israel Adesanya kind of picks him apart. He's got a lot more tools when it comes in the striking department. Darren Till's basically got basic Muay Thai that he's, mastered in that devastating left hand. So I kind of agree with you. I just don't think he's as well-rounded as a fighter as what it's going to take to become a champion. So it'll be interesting. But all right. So what's your prediction?
I have Rob Whittaker by decision. I think Darren is an extremely tough guy. I think he'll have moments in this fight. I think he'll catch Rob with some good strikes. But I just think Rob Whittaker is too well-rounded a fighter. I could see Rob, especially in the later rounds, getting a takedown, being able to pass guard and get to side control or even a mount position. I think he's going to win by decision. That's kind of how I see it going, and I think it's going to be a lopsided decision as well.
I see this as a close fight. I think both guys are going to come out fast. I think the first 1, 2 to 3 rounds are going to be close. They're kind of going to be back and forth. Like you say, I think Darren Till will have his moments. He might land a big shot. But I think Rob is just – there's too much to his game for Darren Till to figure out. And I think Rob – I see it going down. I think Rob will get him kind of worn down, and maybe he gets a trip or takes Darren Till down and then gets the finish maybe on the ground, like a ground and pound 4th round finish. But I think Rob's going to be coming out looking to make a statement, because I think after his loss to Israel, a lot of people wrote him off. And I still think he's one of the best fighters in the world. He's got it all, and he's still a young guy with a lot of experience and a long way to go too. I think he's got a lot more in the tank. So I'm going to go Rob Whittaker. I'm going to go 4th round. I'm going to say knockout or TKO 4th round.
Yeah, I think I agree with you that if Rob Whittaker still has a chin, I mean, skill-wise, he's, I would say, one of the 15 best pound-for-pound fighters in the sport. I mean, I can't think of any guy above 145 with a more balanced game than Rob Whittaker. And I think that is super underrated in this sport of how good he is at all aspects of the game. So I'm almost rooting for Rob here just because I think he's such an incredible talent in the sport.
Yeah, I think Rob is always the guy that I worry about. I'm not necessarily saying that he's chinny right now, but I just think he had a hard road to get to that title fight, to get that title. And then those fights with Yoel Romero, those take a lot out of you. Back-to-back fights with Yoel Romero, the biggest freak of nature in the sport. I mean, that just drains you physically, mentally. That takes a lot out of you. And then, you get starched in front of your home country. So I'm pretty confident where Rob's at right now. He seems like he's saying all the right things. He's in the right headspace. And I agree with you. I think a focused, healthy Robert Whittaker is very, very dangerous and for sure a top 15 fighter in the world still. So, all right, we're on the same page there, Billy. All right, one more question for you.
Shouting out to the beginning of the episode, but you want to talk about a guy who's one of the best fighters to not win the UFC title. I think Yoel Romero is in the top 5 of that list.
Yeah, you got to put him maybe at 4 or 5 for sure. So, all right, my last question for you. This card's obviously got some other fun fights. You've got Shogun and Big Nog.
Little Nog.
Little Nog, sorry. And they're a trilogy fight, right?
Go watch that old fight from Pride this week if you want to get ready for this card, because I don't anticipate this trilogy fight being all that good with these two old Brazilian guys, but that first fight is a barn burner.
How long ago was that? That had to be in the early 2000s.
15 years ago.
Yeah? That's so crazy. So that's on the card. And then what other fights outside of the main event are you excited for?
I really like your guy, Khamzat Chimaev, who has lived on Fight Island for the past week, going up against, I believe it's Rhys McKee, who is now the only active Irish UFC fighter now that McGregor and Joe Duffy are retired. So McKee is a guy.
Is he an SBG guy?
I don't think he's out of SBG, but he's a guy that our Irish correspondent Sean Sheehan is very high on. So I'm excited to see that fight.
Yeah. For me, Alexander Gustafsson coming back at heavyweight too. So, Gustafsson's a guy that light heavyweight, him and DC are kind of those two guys that are 1A, 1B behind John Jones. They just couldn't get over the hump and beat John Jones to become the champion. The addition to him up at heavyweight is very, very interesting to me. He's a guy that, I think his speed, his movement is really going to carry to heavyweight. And I want to see how he fills in because he's a big dude. I think he's like 6'6", 6'7". He's a big guy. He's definitely got that Viking blood in him. But he seems to be focused and ready to make a comeback, and says he's got a lot of fight left in him. And I think if he can get 1 or 2 wins at heavyweight, he's right up there in the heavyweight title contention. So very exciting. That's kind of flying under the radar, but Gustafsson's one of my favorite fighters, and it's going to be really good to see him back this week.
Yeah, should be a fun one. I'm excited for this card.
All right, Billy, any closing words? We went a little over hour and 10, but we're getting better.
Man, I think it'll be interesting, over the next couple months with kind of the return of your traditional stick and ball sports and seeing where the UFC shakes out. But some fun Fight Island cards, a fun one coming up this weekend, and again, everybody should go back and watch that first Lil Nog against Shogun fight from Pride, because that is as fun as fights get.
Also, Bellator back in action this week. We forgot to talk about that.
Oh, shout out Cass Bell.
Our boy Cass Bell's on the card. Who else is on that card?
Sergio Pettis against Ricky Bandejas in the main event. Aaron Pico coming back. I mean, That's a fun card. A little appetizer that's Friday night before we head back to Fight Island.
Absolutely. So, Bellator's back. Everything's getting back to normal, Billy. We're getting there week by week. All right, everybody. So, we had a lot covered there, but as always, we appreciate you tuning in, checking it out, sharing it, all that good stuff. We'll keep bringing the action. We'll be back next week to break down this weekend's card. Billy, any closing words from you?
Wear a mask.
Everyone wear a mask. Corona sucks. I witnessed it firsthand. It's not fun. Wear a mask. Everyone wear a mask. We'll make some Parker's MMA mask. Pass them out. All right. We'll see everyone next week. Have a good weekend.
Texas Trees is the premier tree care company in the DFW area. Whether you need basic maintenance or specialized services, when it comes to trees, we've got you covered. Pruning, chipping, bracing, and cabling, even root barriers and disease control, we do it all. And if you aren't sure what you need, we have certified arborists on staff to point you in the right direction. Visit us at northtexastrees.net. That's northtexastrees.net. Thanks for listening to Parker's MMA Show. Take a moment to rate and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, and visit ParkerKeen'sMMAShow.podbean.com for additional information on Parker and to stay up to date on the latest drama in the fight world. For more information and important links about today's episode, check out the show notes.